My son accused me of stealing from him. And in that moment, I realized something worse than losing money. I realized I could lose my child while still standing right in front of him. He didn't scream, he didn't curse, he just looked at me like I was someone he didn't know anymore. I raised that boy with empty pockets and full hands. I skipped meals so he wouldn't feel hunger. I worked nights so he could sleep safely. But none of that mattered when the money went missing. Because when trust breaks between a mother and her son, it doesn't shatter loudly. It breaks quietly, and it changes everything. And what happened after that accusation followed me for the rest of my life. I remember the exact time it happened. Late afternoon, the kind of quiet hour when the house feels tired, sunlight leaning through the window like it was ready to leave too. I was at the kitchen table folding a towel that didn't really need folding, just keeping my hands busy. That's when I heard the door open. Not gently, not angrily, just fast. I looked up, expecting a greeting, a "Hi, Mom," a smile. Instead, he stood there in the doorway, still holding his keys. He didn't sit down, he didn't take his jacket off. He stayed standing, and somehow I knew, before he even spoke. "Mom," he said. Just that one word. I felt my chest tighten. "Yes, baby?" I said. He walked in slowly and stood across from me. Not beside me, not close, across. "The money is gone." I blinked. Once, then again. "What money?" I asked. He pressed his lips together like he was choosing his words carefully. "The money I told you about. The cash. The savings." I tried to smile, tried to keep my voice light. "Well, maybe you moved it," I said. "That happens." He shook his head. "No," he said. I checked. Something about his tone made my stomach drop. I set the towel down. "When did you last see it?" I asked. "This morning." "And you're sure?" I said. "Yes." He looked past me then, at the walls, at the furniture, at the house I built piece by piece with tired hands. Then he looked back at me. "You're the only one who knew where it was." I felt heat rush to my face. I laughed once, a small laugh, a confused laugh. "You don't mean that the way it sounds," I said. He didn't laugh back. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. "Say what you're thinking," I told him. He exhaled slowly. "I don't want to accuse you," he said, "but I can't think of anyone else." That sentence knocked the air out of me. I had imagined many painful moments in my life, loss, loneliness, regret, but never this. Never standing in my own kitchen, listening to my own child explain why I might be a thief. "I didn't take your money," I said. My voice came out steady, too steady. He rubbed his face with both hands. "I know you're saying that, but the facts don't make sense." "What facts?" I asked. He started listing them, one by one. "I kept it in the same place. I didn't tell anyone else. You knew I had it. No one else comes here." Each sentence felt like a quiet accusation, not loud, not cruel, just final. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping the floor. "You think I would steal from you?" I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation broke something inside me. "I don't know what to think," he said. I walked past him to the drawer he was talking about, the one I'd opened 1,000 times for napkins and batteries. I pulled it open, empty. I stared at it like it might change if I looked long enough. Then I closed it and turned back to him. "I swear on my life," I said, "I did not take your money." He looked at the floor. That hurt more than if he'd shouted, because it meant doubt had already taken root. I felt embarrassed, not because I was guilty, but because I was being measured. I sat back down, my legs weak. "Why would I do that?" I asked softly. He shrugged. "I don't know," he said, "but people do things when they're desperate." Desperate. I had been many things in my life. Tired, lonely, overworked, but desperate enough to steal from my own child? That word sat between us like a stranger. "I raised you better than that." He said, "I know,"
And that's why this doesn't make sense." We stood there in silence again. I wanted to cry, but I didn't, because something told me if I cried, it would look like guilt. I tried to explain calmly my routines, my days, where I had been, what I had touched. He listened, but his eyes stayed guarded. "I need time," he finally said. "Time." He reached for his keys again. "Please don't leave like this," I said. He paused at the door. "I just need space," he replied. Space from me. That was when fear wrapped around my chest. "I'm still your mother," I said. "I know, but right now, I don't know what to believe." Then he walked out. The door closed softly behind him. I stood there, staring at it. The house felt colder, not because of the air, because trust had left. I sat back down at the table and finally let my hands shake. I pressed my palms together to stop them. I replayed everything: his words, my answers, his silence, and one thought kept repeating: if my own child can believe this about me, what else can I lose? That night, sleep never came. I lay awake listening to the house breeze. Every creak sounded louder, every memory felt heavier. By morning, nothing had changed, except me, and I didn't know yet that this accusation was only the first crack.
Before anyone ever accused me of anything, before money came between us, before my son looked at me with doubt in his eyes, I was just his mother. Nothing more, nothing less. I became a mother young, too young, some people said. Young enough that I was still learning who I was while learning how to keep another human being alive. I remember the day I found out I was pregnant. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the test in my shaking hands. The room felt quiet in a way that made my ears ring. I was scared, but beneath that fear, there was something else: resolve. From that moment on, my life stopped being about what I wanted. It became about what he needed. His father didn't stay, that's the truth. There's no anger left in me about it now, just facts. So it was me and my son against the world. I worked whatever job would take me. Cleaning, cooking, late shifts nobody wanted. Some nights I came home so tired, I had to sit in my car for a minute before walking inside. But every time I opened the door and saw him, everything else faded. He was a quiet child, observant, the kind that watched before speaking. When he was small, he used to hold my finger instead of my whole hand, like he was afraid of letting go completely. I noticed everything about him: the way he frowned when he concentrated, the way he lined up his toys carefully, the way he looked at me to make sure I was watching. Money was always tight, always. I learned how to stretch meals, how to make soup last 2 days, how to smile when the lights flickered and pretend everything was fine. There were nights I told him I wasn't hungry, just so he could eat more. I didn't call it sacrifice then, it was just motherhood. When he started school, I worried constantly, not about grades, about kindness, about honesty. I told him over and over, always tell the truth even when it's hard. I said it so often it became part of our language. If he broke something, I didn't yell. I asked him to tell me what happened. If he made a mistake, I didn't shame him. I helped him fix it. Because I wanted him to grow up knowing he could come to me with anything. When he got older, things didn't magically get easier. Bills grew, responsibilities grew. But so did my pride in him. He worked hard in school. He didn't get into trouble. He respected elders. People used to say, "You raised him right." And every time they said that, my chest would swell just a little. I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes. I worried too much. I held on too tightly sometimes. But everything I did with love. When he got his first job, I cried after he left for work. Not because I was sad, because I was proud. He came home tired, counting his money carefully, talking about plans. That's when money became something different for him. Not just survival, security, freedom. I encouraged him to save, to be careful,
to think ahead. I never asked him for money, never borrowed, never hinted. I didn't want him to feel responsible for me. That wasn't his job. Even when things were hard for me, I handled it quietly, because that's what mothers do. As he grew into a man, our relationship changed. Not worse, just different. He didn't need me the way he used to, and I was proud of that too. But I was still his safe place. At least I thought I was. He told me where he kept his savings because he trusted me, because I was his mother. I didn't see it as a temptation. I saw it as a responsibility, something to protect, not touch. So when he stood in front of me that day, accusing me with careful words, it felt like my entire life was being questioned, not just my actions, my character. All those years of honesty, all those nights of going without, all those lessons I taught him, suddenly they felt invisible. I kept thinking back to moments, little ones. The time he lost his wallet as a teenager and cried because he thought he'd been careless. I hugged him and told him mistakes happen. The time he brought home extra change a cashier gave him by accident and asked what he should do. I told him to return it. He did. That was my son. So how did we end up here, sitting across from each other, measured by suspicion? I lay awake that night replaying memories, trying to find the moment where trust might have cracked without me noticing. Was it when I stopped asking about his day? When I started moving slower? When I needed help carrying groceries? Did he see weakness and mistake it for desperation? That thought hurt more than I can explain. Because mothers don't stop being strong, we just get quieter about it. I realized something else too. I had spent my whole life making sure my son felt safe, but I had never prepared myself for the day I wouldn't feel safe with him. That thought settled heavy in my chest. By morning, my heart felt tired, not broken yet, just worn. I didn't know then that this accusation would force me to look at my past with new eyes, that love doesn't always protect you, and sacrifice doesn't always earn trust, and that sometimes the people you raise with honesty are the ones who question it the hardest. But at that moment, all I knew was this: I was still his mother, I was still innocent, and I was about to find out how fragile everything I built really was.
The money didn't come from nowhere, and it didn't disappear quietly either. It had a story, and once it was gone, that story became a weapon. My son had been saving for a long time, not casually, not loosely, carefully. He didn't trust banks much, said it made him nervous, seeing numbers instead of something real. So he kept his savings in cash. I didn't argue with him. Everyone has their own fears. He chose a place in the house that felt safe to him, a place he checked often, a place he thought no one would touch. He told me about it one evening while we were washing dishes, not because he had to, because he trusted me. "Just so you know," he said, "it's there in case anything ever happens." I remember nodding and saying, "That's smart." I didn't ask how much. I didn't need to. To me, it wasn't money. It was his future. That's what made the accusation so heavy. The morning he discovered it was missing, he didn't panic right away. He checked once, then again. He told me later he even laughed a little, thinking he'd moved it without remembering. But when it still wasn't there, his chest tightened. He checked every drawer, every pocket, every place nearby. Nothing. That's when his thoughts turned darker. He started replaying recent days in his head. Who had been in the house? Who had walked through which room? The list was short, too short. It led back to me. When he told me this later, he spoke like he was explaining a math problem. Logical, detached. As far as I can tell, nothing else makes sense. But life isn't math, and neither is trust. What hurt wasn't just that he suspected me, it was how quickly the suspicion formed. I asked him to walk me through everything, slowly. When was the last time he touched the money? Who was home that day? What time did he leave? I wanted to help, to solve it together. But the more questions I asked, the more defensive he became.
"It feels like you're stalling," he said at one point. Stalling, as if I had something to hide. I started noticing little things in his tone, how he repeated certain details, how he emphasized that I knew. "Remember," he said, "you were home that day." I was. I'm home most days. That fact suddenly felt dangerous. I told him my routine, the grocery trip, the phone call, the time I spent cleaning. Normal things, ordinary things. But ordinary things don't sound convincing when someone is looking for guilt. He asked if I had been struggling financially. That question stung. I answered honestly. I manage. Not rich, not desperate, just managing. He nodded slowly, and in that nod, I felt judged. I realized then that money has a way of changing how people see you, even family, especially family. He asked if I had touched the drawer that week. I told him yes, I keep batteries there sometimes. That was a mistake. His eyes sharpened. "So you were in there," he said. I wanted to pull the words back into my mouth. I explained that I hadn't noticed anything unusual, that I hadn't touched his money. But explanations start to sound like excuses once doubt sets in. He told me he'd counted the cash days earlier. He remembered the exact amount. I believed him. That's what made this harder, because if the money truly was gone and I hadn't taken it, then something else had happened, and nobody wanted to look for that something else. Not yet. Instead, the focus stayed on me. He asked if I had ever taken small amounts before. I felt my throat tighten. "No," I said. "Never." He didn't say anything after that. He just wrote something down on his phone. That hurt more than shouting would have, because it felt like I was being documented, like a problem to be solved. As the day went on, his frustration grew. He walked through the house again, opening doors harder than necessary. Each sound made me flinch. I wanted to scream that I was still his mother, that I was standing right there. Instead, I followed him quietly, trying to be helpful. We checked places together, under cushions, inside boxes, behind furniture. Every empty space made the air heavier. At one point, he said, "If you took it, just tell me." That sentence broke something open inside me, because it wasn't just an accusation anymore. It was an invitation to confess. I looked at him and said, "I will not admit to something I didn't do." My voice trembled then, just a little. He noticed, and I hated that. I could see him weighing everything, my past, my words, my reactions. I wondered if he remembered all the times I had chosen honesty over comfort, or if those memories had already been replaced by suspicion. Later that afternoon, he left the house without saying much. I sat alone, staring at the drawer, empty. I felt like it was staring back at me. I asked myself if I had missed something, if I had touched the money without realizing. I went through my own memories carefully, painfully, but nothing changed. I knew what I hadn't done, and knowing that didn't help, because innocence doesn't explain absence. That night, I realized something important. When money goes missing, people don't just look for it, they look for someone to blame. And the closest person is often the easiest target, especially if that person loves you. By the time he came home that evening, something had shifted between us. The house felt divided. I tried once more to suggest alternatives, to think wider, to consider possibilities, but he was already tired. He said, "I need answers," and I realized then that answers might come at a cost, because once you start suspecting someone you love, you can't unknow it. And even if the money returned tomorrow, something else was already gone. Trust doesn't disappear all at once. It slips away quietly, one question at a time. And this was only the beginning.
The first time he raised his voice at me about the money, I didn't recognize him. Not because he was loud, because he was certain. Certainty is cold. It leaves no room for explanation. It happened 2 days after the money went missing. 2 days of silence. 2 days of him barely speaking to me. 2 days of doors closing harder than usual. I tried to keep the house normal. I cooked, I cleaned, I asked if he wanted tea. He said no to everything. That afternoon, he came into the living room and stood in front of me. Again, he didn't sit. "I need you to answer me honestly," he said. I looked up from the chair. "I have been," I replied. He crossed his arms, the same way he used to when he was a teenager and angry. "How did you pay your bills this month?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I said. "I mean," he continued, "you've been short on money before. Rent doesn't care about honesty." I felt my face burn. "I paid my bills the same way I always do," I said, carefully. He shook his head. "That's not an answer." I stood up slowly. "You don't get to talk to me like this," I said. He laughed once, a short laugh, without humor. "I'm not talking," he said. "I'm trying to understand." But his tone said otherwise. He started listing things again, small things this time. How I'd been quiet lately, how I'd asked for his savings months ago, how I'd mentioned prices rising. Each observation felt twisted, taken out of context, turned sharp. I realized something then. He wasn't trying to find the truth. He was trying to justify his doubt. "Stop," I said. "You're turning normal life into evidence." He stared at me. "Then explain it," he said. I told him again. Everything. I explained my budget, my routines, my habits. I even offered to show him my bank statements. He waved the idea away. "That doesn't explain where the cash went." I felt humiliated, not because I had done something wrong, but because I was being interrogated by my own son. At one point, he asked, "Have you ever taken money from anyone before?" That question hurt more than anything else. "Is that who you think I am?" I asked. He didn't answer. That silence landed like a verdict. I felt myself shrinking, like every year of my life was being reduced to this moment. I told him about the nights I'd gone without, the choices I'd made, the honesty I taught him. He listened, but he didn't soften. "I'm not saying you're a bad person," he said. "I'm saying people do things when they're under pressure." Pressure. That word echoed in my head. Because he wasn't wrong. Life had been heavy lately. But pressure doesn't erase character. It reveals it. And mine was being rewritten without my consent. I realized something else too. He had started talking about me in the third person. Not you, but someone. If someone needed money, he said, they might justify it. Someone, not mother. That's when I felt the distance grow. I asked him if he trusted me. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "I don't know," he finally said. I sat down heavily. Because once trust becomes a question, love doesn't protect you anymore. Later that evening, things got worse. A family member called. I could hear my son in the other room talking quietly. Then my name, then silence. When he came back, I asked him, "Who was that?" He avoided my eyes. "Just checking something," he said. My stomach dropped. I realized then that this wasn't staying between us. The story was spreading, not as truth, as suspicion. I felt exposed, small, like my reputation was being whispered about while I was still standing in the room. I confronted him. "Are you telling people I stole from you?" I asked. He didn't deny it. "I told them the money's missing and that you knew about it." That felt like betrayal layered on betrayal. "You let them draw their own conclusions," I said. He didn't respond. That night, I cried quietly in my room. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to release the pressure in my chest. I realized I was grieving something. Not money, not trust, the image of myself in my son's eyes. The next morning, he avoided me again.
I made breakfast he didn't touch. I spoke, he answered with nods. I had never felt so alone in my own home. By the third day, I stopped trying. I stopped explaining, because defending your innocence over and over starts to feel like confessing. I watched him change. He locked his door now. He checked drawers. He watched me carefully. And I understood then, he no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as a possibility, a risk. That realization hurt more than the accusation itself, because accusations can be proven wrong, but doubt lingers. That evening, I stood in the hallway and watched him walk past me. He didn't look up, and I thought to myself, this is what it feels like when trust turns cold. It doesn't explode, it freezes. And once it freezes, everything around it starts to crack. I didn't know yet how far this would go. I didn't know how much worse it could get. All I knew was that something precious between us was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it.
After a while, something inside me changed. At first, I had begged him to believe me. Then I had explained. Then I had defended myself. But now I found myself trying to prove something that should never have needed proof: innocence. I started keeping track of everything I did, where I went, what time I left the house, what I touched. Not because I was guilty, but because I was afraid. Afraid that if I couldn't explain every moment, someone else would fill in the blanks for me. I began offering things he never asked for: receipts, bank statements, old notes. I laid them out on the table one morning, like evidence. He glanced at them briefly. "This doesn't mean anything," he said. "It doesn't explain the cash." That sentence drained something out of me, because no matter how much I showed him, it would never be enough. Cash leaves no trail, and innocence leaves no marks. I asked him if we could go to the police, not to accuse anyone, just to report the missing money. He looked at me sharply. "Why would we do that?" he asked. "So it's not just us guessing, so someone neutral can help." He thought about it, then he said something that hurt deeply. "I don't want to make this public." Public. As if my name was something that needed protection, as if my reputation was already fragile. I realized then he didn't want answers. He wanted control. I started noticing how people around us were changing. A family member stopped calling me. Another spoke to me differently, careful, distant. No one accused me directly. They didn't have to. Silence can say plenty. I overheard a conversation one afternoon. My name again, lowered voices. I felt like a ghost in my own life. I began to doubt myself in small, dangerous ways. Had I touched the drawer more than I remembered? Had I moved something without thinking? I checked my purse again and again, my coat pockets, every bag. Nothing. But doubt is contagious, and it had infected even me. One evening, I sat down with my son and asked him to please listen one more time. I spoke slowly, carefully. I told him how it felt to be accused, how it felt to lose his trust. I told him I would rather lose the money than lose him. He listened quietly. When I finished, he said, "I just need the truth." That sentence broke me, because I had already given him the truth, and it hadn't been enough. I stopped crying after that, not because I was stronger, but because I was empty. I began pulling away too, not out of anger, out of self-respect. I stopped trying to explain myself, stopped offering proof. If he wanted to believe me, he would. If he didn't, no amount of evidence would change that. But the distance kept growing. He started locking his door, checking his belongings. I noticed he moved things around, like he was testing me, watching. I realized then that this wasn't about the money anymore. It was about power, who controlled the story, and right now, it wasn't me. One night, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized myself. I looked smaller, tired. I whispered out loud, "I didn't do this." I
I needed to hear it from myself, because when enough people doubt you, your own voice starts to fade. I began thinking about leaving, not running away, just stepping back. But I had nowhere to go. This was my home, my life, and I shouldn't have to leave because I was innocent. I reminded myself of who I was, a mother, an honest woman, someone who had survived harder things than this. Still, each day felt heavier. By the end of the week, I understood something painful. You can prove facts, but you can't force trust. And once trust is gone, you start defending not just your actions, but your existence. That realization settled deep in my chest. I didn't know yet how this would end. I didn't know the truth behind the missing money. All I knew was this: I was fighting to keep my dignity in a situation designed to strip it away. And the hardest part wasn't being accused. It was watching my son slowly turn away from me while I stood there with nothing but the truth in my hands.
I still remember the night it all began to unravel. After the chaos of the accusation had settled into a bitter silence, I felt a heaviness in my chest I couldn't explain. Sleep eluded me, not because of worry about what my son thought, but because a nagging doubt had taken root. Something about that day, it didn't make sense. I went over every detail in my mind, replaying the moment when he had screamed at me in the kitchen, pointing fingers like I had just committed some unthinkable crime. His words were sharp, cutting straight through the bond we had shared for decades. "How could you steal from me, Mom? I trusted you." Each syllable had felt like a hammer pounding into my chest. I stared at the ceiling, my heart racing. I could feel tears threatening to fall, but I refused to let them. I knew, deep down, I was innocent. But innocence doesn't always speak loud enough to drown out someone else's anger, especially when it comes from your own child. The next morning, I decided I had to dig deeper. I had to understand why he believed this, why he was so sure I had done something I didn't. I knew that if I stayed silent, the accusation would fester, poisoning every interaction between us. But confronting him directly felt impossible. The look in his eyes, it was full of betrayal. And betrayal, I had learned long ago, was a dangerous thing to face. I started with the evidence, or in this case, what little there was. His missing items, a few $100s, a jewelry chain, and some important papers. He claimed I had taken them when I visited his apartment the previous weekend, but there was no proof. No one had seen me take anything. No security cameras, no fingerprints, nothing. Only his certainty and his anger. Still, I couldn't ignore the fact that something had shifted, something deeper than money or stolen items. His behavior, normally patient and understanding, had grown distant, sharp. He avoided eye contact, barely spoke more than necessary. And then there were the messages, angry texts in the middle of the night, accusing me of all sorts of things I hadn't done. That's when I realized I couldn't solve this alone. I needed help. I reached out to his friends, people I had known for years, hoping they might shed light on his sudden mistrust. But they were cautious, protective of him, unsure of what to say. The truth had become entangled in layers of fear, pride, and miscommunication. The turning point came when I remembered something he had mentioned in passing, a dispute at work, a financial problem, something he hadn't wanted to share with me. Could it be that the stress he was under had made him see a shadow where none existed? The thought gave me a small measure of hope, but also fear. If I was wrong, if my efforts to uncover the truth made him angrier, I could lose him forever. I decided to approach it like a detective. I retraced my steps from the weekend he accused me, scrutinizing every interaction, every place I had gone. I remembered stopping by his favorite cafe, checking the mail, visiting the library. Every detail mattered. Nothing pointed to theft, yet the gnawing feeling that something had been missed wouldn't leave me. And then I found it. Something tiny, almost invisible, something I would never have noticed if I hadn't been desperate.
A small clue hidden in plain sight, something that tied the missing items not to me, but to someone else entirely. My pulse quickened, a mixture of relief and fear surging through me. If I was right, revealing it could save my relationship or shatter it completely if he didn't believe me. I spent days, nights even, piecing the puzzle together. Each revelation was a knife's edge between hope and despair, and slowly, the truth began to take shape. But knowing the truth and proving it, those were two very different battles. I had to prepare carefully. One wrong move, one accusatory word, and the fragile thread of trust we had left could break forever. But I couldn't stay silent any longer. I had to act. And then came the moment that changed everything. The moment when the first piece of the truth finally confronted us both, unmasking a reality neither of us expected. But I'll tell you about that in the next part. What I uncovered not only cleared my name, it revealed secrets my son had been hiding even from himself. Secrets that would make him question everything he thought he knew about me and about himself.
I still remember the moment I discovered it, the clue that shifted everything. It was tucked away so subtly, hidden in plain sight, that I almost walked past it without noticing. But something inside me, the stubborn, unshapable part of a mother who knows her own innocence, made me stop. It was a small notebook, nothing fancy, just a spiral-bound thing filled with scribbles. I had seen it before, lying on the corner of his desk, but I never thought to open it. On that night, after hours of sleepless thinking, I felt compelled. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, each line a mix of messy handwriting and hurried notes. And then, there it was. There were lists, dates, items, money, and next to each, initials that weren't mine. At first, I didn't understand. My son had written his own name next to some of the things, but then, beside the dates of the alleged thefts, there was someone else, someone I hadn't considered, someone who had been in the apartment when I visited that weekend. My heart raced. Could it be? Could someone else have done this while he had convinced himself I was the culprit? I had to be careful. I couldn't just storm in and say, "Look, I'm innocent." That would have sounded defensive, and he might have shut me out completely. I needed to plan my approach. I started piecing together timelines. The dates in the notebook matched the days his items went missing, and each time there was a name, friends, acquaintances, people he trusted, people I had always seen as harmless. My chest tightened as I realized just how tangled things had become. Then I remembered the day he yelled at me. That day, someone had knocked on the door unexpectedly, a friend of his stopping by unannounced. I had been distracted, busy making coffee, helping him with some papers. That must have been the moment. But I never touched his things. My innocence was staring me in the face, written clearly in his notebook, but he didn't see it yet. The next morning, I confronted myself first. I had to remain calm, collected, and persuasive. There was no room for anger, no space for frustration. This was about restoring trust, not winning an argument. I rehearsed every word, every gentle tone, every pause I would need to make him listen without shutting down. Finally, I approached him. The moment was tense, silent, heavy with months of unresolved anger. I held the notebook in my hands, letting him see it. I could feel the heat in my chest, the tears threatening to fall, but I forced them back. I had to stay strong. "Look at this," I said softly. "I think this explains what's been happening." He glared at me, suspicion and hurt swimming in his eyes. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice low, almost trembling. I opened the notebook to the exact page. "These lists, they show dates and initials. None of them are mine. Look closely." He leaned in, scanning the page. His face shifted slowly, confusion replacing anger, then disbelief. He swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he traced the lines. This can't be right," he muttered. "It is," I said gently. "I didn't take your things. Someone else did.
I found the pattern tonight. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of realization hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I could see him processing, unlearning months of anger, doubt, and mistrust. And then, finally, a single word escaped his lips. Mom. That one word held everything: apology, shock, relief, shame. I nodded, holding back tears. I wanted to comfort him, to say, "It's okay, we'll fix this together." But I also needed him to understand the gravity of the situation. The revelation didn't just prove my innocence, it exposed a hidden side of my son's life, a side I hadn't known. Fears and pressures he had buried deep, twisting his perception until he saw me as the enemy. It was heartbreaking, but it also opened a door, an opportunity to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But the story wasn't over. As I dug deeper, following the trail the notebook had revealed, I uncovered something even more shocking. Someone close to him, someone he trusted completely, had been orchestrating these thefts, manipulating him, and keeping me falsely accused. That's when I realized the truth wasn't just about stolen items, it was about betrayal, deception, and lies that had been hiding in plain sight for months. And revealing this truth would change everything in our family. I could see it in his eyes, the mixture of fear and understanding. He knew now that he had doubted the wrong person, and yet he also realized he had been blind to the real culprit. The tension in the room shifted, but it didn't disappear. There was still a storm coming, a confrontation with the person behind it all, someone who would not go quietly. As we sat there, notebook in hand, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that my name was cleared, but dread because the path ahead was dangerous. The person responsible was cunning, careful, and had no intention of being exposed, and they were counting on us tearing each other apart. We had won a small battle, but the war was far from over. And little did I know, the next revelation would shake the very foundation of my family, forcing us to confront truths we were not ready to face. But that is what I'll share in the next part, the moment when the real betrayal comes to light, and everything I thought I knew about my son, our family, and even myself is challenged in ways I could never have imagined.
After the first revelation, I thought the storm had passed. I had proof of my innocence. My son's eyes were no longer filled with distrust, and a fragile threat of reconciliation had begun to form between us. But I had learned one painful truth. Sometimes the quietest moments hold the deadliest secrets. The notebook had shown me someone else was behind the thefts, but I couldn't have anticipated the identity of that person. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some random opportunist. It was someone who had been part of our lives for years, someone my son trusted completely, and that realization hit me like a punch to the chest. I remember sitting across from him, notebook open on the kitchen table, the dim light casting shadows across our faces. I could see the questions forming in his eyes, the fear creeping in as he began to suspect what I already knew. "Mom, are you saying it's—" He hesitated, voice shaking. "Yes," I whispered, almost afraid to say the name out loud. "It's her. She's been taking your things and making you think I was the one." His face went pale, a mixture of disbelief and anger. "No, she couldn't." His voice trailed off, his mind struggling to reconcile years of trust with the reality in front of him. It was true. My son's best friend, someone he had considered family, had been manipulating him, staging thefts, and planting subtle evidence to frame me. And why? That part was even more shocking. Greed, jealousy, and a twisted need for control. She wanted access to his apartment, his money, and perhaps even to test the limits of his loyalty, and she had succeeded until now. I could feel my hands trembling. Rage bubbled under the surface, but I had to stay calm. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting my son, reclaiming our home, and exposing someone who had been betraying him for months. We decided to confront her carefully. I didn't want a scene, I didn't want more accusations flying, but I needed her to understand that her deception was over. That night,
We invited her over under the pretense of a casual dinner, but I had the notebook, every piece of evidence carefully noted, ready to reveal her guilt. She arrived, smiling, unaware of the storm about to hit. My son sat quietly, tension etched across his face. I stayed calm, my voice soft but unwavering. "We need to talk," I said, placing the notebook on the table. At first, she laughed, dismissive, as if we were overreacting. "What are you talking about?" she said, twirling her hair, pretending innocence. But the second she saw the pages, her smile faltered. She glanced at the handwriting, the initials, the careful records of her thefts. Panic flickered across her face. My son spoke next, voice trembling with a mix of hurt and anger. "Why? Why would you do this to me, to Mom?" She tried to lie, to deflect, but I didn't allow it. I presented every detail, the missing items, the dates, the small patterns she thought no one would notice. Every lie crumbled under the weight of facts. And then she snapped. Her calm, composed facade shattered, and suddenly she was screaming, accusing us, twisting the truth. But I didn't back down. I stood my ground, my voice steady, my heart pounding, telling her the truth doesn't lie. We know everything. It's over. For the first time, my son looked at me with awe. The woman he had doubted, the mother he had accused, had not only been innocent, but protected him from the betrayal of someone he trusted completely. And I realized in that moment, sometimes the deepest hurt comes from those we never suspect, and the strongest courage comes from the ones we almost lose. After that night, the tension slowly eased, but the emotional scars remained. My son apologized over and over, tears streaming down his face, as he tried to reconcile the months of anger and mistrust he had directed at me. I forgave him, not because it was easy, but because love sometimes requires us to rise above anger, fear, and betrayal. We changed our routines, we secured our home, and we rebuilt our trust slowly, piece by piece. And while the betrayal had left a mark, it also strengthened us. I had learned that innocence is powerful, the truth will eventually surface, and that love, motherly love, can survive even the darkest deceptions. But even with the betrayal exposed and my name cleared, the experience left us questioning everything we thought we knew about trust, family, and loyalty. Could we ever truly let our guard down again? Could my son fully forgive, not just me, but also himself for doubting the person who had always been by his side? These were questions we had to face together, and ones I'll explore in the next part, where we confront the aftermath of betrayal, the fragile healing, and the unexpected twists that come after the storm.
The days after the betrayal were quiet, but heavy. Our home, once filled with tension and anger, now carried a fragile calm. My son and I sat together often, sometimes in silence, sometimes speaking in whispers, as if the words themselves could break the delicate thread of trust we were rebuilding. I watched him carefully. He seemed smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally, as though the weight of months of suspicion and anger had pressed him down. And I realized something. Forgiveness isn't instantaneous. It's not a switch you can flip. It's a slow process, a series of small steps taken with caution and care. We began with small acts, a cup of coffee in the morning, a quiet conversation about nothing and everything. I let him see that my innocence hadn't wavered, that my love for him had never faltered. And in turn, he began to open up, tentatively at first, revealing fears and frustrations he had buried under pride and anger. One afternoon, he brought out the notebook, the same one that had revealed the betrayal, and looked at me with eyes full of vulnerability. "Mom," he said softly, "I can't believe I accused you. I can't believe I doubted you. I was so blind." I reached for his hand. "It's okay, sweetheart. You were under stress, overwhelmed. You didn't see the truth, but you're learning now. That's what matters." He swallowed hard, a tear escaping his eye. "I feel like I lost months of my life blaming you for something you didn't do. How do I make it right?" "You make it right by being honest from now on, by trusting yourself and trusting me. That's all I need."
The healing process wasn't linear. Some days were full of laughter and warmth, a return to the normalcy we had lost. Other days were heavy, shadows of the past creeping in, reminding us of how fragile trust can be. But each challenge was a lesson, each conversation a step toward redemption. I also realized that the betrayal had brought a gift of its own. It had exposed vulnerabilities we hadn't acknowledged. It had forced my son to confront his own fears and insecurities, and it had forced me to face mine. And through that, our bond grew stronger, not just as mother and son, but as two people who had weathered a storm together and emerged more resilient. We talked often about the person who had caused the deception, about the motives and the lies, but slowly the anger faded, replaced with clarity. We understood that some people reveal themselves not to punish, but to teach. And while her actions had caused pain, they had also brought us closer and reminded us of the importance of vigilance, honesty, and love. I found myself reflecting late at night, thinking about the long journey we had traveled, the accusation, the doubt, the betrayal. It had been a crucible, testing the strength of our relationship. And yet, in the quiet aftermath, I could feel hope blooming, a hope that wasn't naive or blind, but grounded in the truth we had uncovered together. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, I said, "You know, this whole experience, it could have destroyed us, but instead, it's made us stronger." He looked at me, a faint smile breaking through the lingering shadows. "I don't know if I can ever forgive myself completely," he admitted, "but I'll promise I'll try, and I'll never doubt you again." I squeezed his hand, tears welling in my eyes. That's all I need. We're human. We make mistakes. But love can survive almost anything. And in that moment, I understood the true meaning of redemption. It wasn't about punishment for those who wronged us. It wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about reclaiming what was lost, restoring trust, and finding peace after the storm. But even as we healed, there remained a lingering question, one I couldn't ignore. Could we ever fully trust again? Could my son truly let go of the fear that had clouded his judgment for so long? Or would the shadow of betrayal always remain, a subtle reminder that even the closest bonds can be tested in unimaginable ways? These questions didn't have easy answers, but what I did know was this: we survived. We faced deception, accusation, and betrayal, and we had come through it stronger. And sometimes, that's all that matters. As I watched my son sleeping that night, I whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the truth, for love, and for the resilience that had carried us through the darkest days. And I knew, deep down, that no matter what the future held, we would face it together, undaunted, unbroken, and with a renewed understanding of the strength of our bond.
The house was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that felt almost sacred after months of chaos. I sat by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, and I let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like forever. The storm had passed, and though the traces of it remained, so did the lessons it had left behind. I thought about my son, now sitting across the room, quietly reading. The tension that had once filled the air was gone, replaced by a fragile peace. He glanced up, caught my gaze, and smiled. A small, tentative smile, but one that carried more meaning than words ever could. It was the smile of someone who had lost and regained trust, who had faced the truth and survived it. The journey to this moment had been harrowing. Accusation, doubt, betrayal, each had struck like a knife through the heart. But through it all, I had discovered something I already knew deep down. Innocence doesn't need to shout. Truth, no matter how long it hides, will find its way to the light. And love, real love, can endure even the sharpest betrayal. I reflected on the person who had tried to tear us apart. Her deception had caused pain, yes, but it had also revealed the strength and resilience we didn't know we possessed. It was a bitter truth, but also a necessary one. Sometimes the people we trust most are capable of the deepest harm, but that doesn't erase the goodness in others, and it doesn't erase the bond that has been tested and survived.
My son approached me then, his steps hesitant, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mom," he said softly, "I don't think I can ever fully express how sorry I am. I doubted you, I hurt you, but I hope we can move forward. I hope we can rebuild everything." I looked into his eyes, seeing the mixture of remorse, fear, and hope. I nodded. "We can," I said. "It will take time, and there may still be moments of doubt or fear, but as long as we face them together, we'll be okay." We talked for hours that night, not about the past, not about the betrayal, but about the future, about dreams, about small joys, about plans that had been put on hold while we navigated the chaos. And in those conversations, I felt a sense of closure. Not total, because life rarely gives complete closure, but enough to know that we were moving forward. As I lay in bed later, I thought about how fragile trust is, and yet how resilient the human heart can be. I thought about how quickly doubt can cloud judgment, and how vital it is to hold on to love, even when fear threatens to pull us under. And I realized that life is often messy, unpredictable, and painful, but it is also full of moments of redemption, of connection, and of unexpected strength. There were lingering questions, of course. Could we ever trust completely again? Could the scars of betrayal fade fully? I didn't know the answers, and perhaps that's part of the story. Some things remain unresolved, some mysteries linger, and that's okay. Life isn't about perfect endings. It's about surviving, learning, and continuing to love even when it's difficult. The night grew darker, and I finally closed my eyes, letting the peace of the moment settle around me. I whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the truth, for my son, and for the resilience that had carried us through the storm. And I promised myself that no matter what lay ahead, I would hold on to that gratitude, that hope, and that love. Because in the end, that is what matters. Not the accusations, not the betrayal, not the anger or fear, but the bond we fight to preserve, the trust we rebuild, and the love that survives even the darkest nights. And as the stars appeared one by one in the night sky, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in months. The battle was over, the truth was revealed, and though life would continue to bring challenges, I knew one thing for certain. We had faced the impossible, and we had emerged stronger, closer, and wiser than before. And maybe that is the lesson I want to leave you with, that even when the ones we love doubt us, when betrayal cuts deep, and when the world seems to turn against us, there is still hope, there is still love, and there is still a path back to each other, if we are brave enough to walk it.